Hello, Cleveland, and welcome back to another edition of the Dogland Podcast. I am your host, Jack McCurry, and joining me, as always, is Jack Duffin. Well, always as of late, Jack Duffin. But Jack, come on, buddy.
I'm doing good. Still got a food coma left over from Super Bowl, waddling around the living room, but happy to sit down for a little while longer and chat more Browns.
Absolutely. Here we are, the day after the Super Bowl, and we are now transitioning to the defensive side of the ball in our offseason deep dive. We are starting today with the edge defenders slash defensive end, however you want to call it. It's the edge defender now position at this point. When you look at that position and when it comes to the Browns, going into 2021, there's really only one name guaranteed to be here, and that's Myles Garrett. Obviously, he's coming into his fifth season, and Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the fifth-year option, and then next year begins the extension, correct?
Yeah, so even though Myles Garrett got paid last off-season, he's still effectively on his rookie deal, so he's going into his fifth-year option year, and then, he's got 5 more years after this year, so he's got 6 years left in total, but he's still cheap on the deal because they've backloaded it all because especially COVID, that was part of the sort of deal with Myles is, look, we'll pay you, but we want to push it as far back as possible on the salary cap. He's still getting his money, so his guaranteed money's still there. It's just a different way of doing it. So it makes sense for both sides. Myles knows he's getting paid. The Browns get a deal done early, and the flexibility and cap flexibility over the next 2 years is essential. Quite frankly, 2023 doesn't really matter too much. We could be looking at a 250 million cap, I believe. So it's going to shoot up.
So when you're looking at the defensive line, on average, according to your piece, which is at thedogland.com, everybody please go check them out. NFL teams usually have around 9 defensive linemen on their rosters. And Jack, you say you want 2 starters on the edge playing approximately 66% of the snaps. And then you want 2 rotational pieces behind them where they'd play around 40% of the snaps. And, when you look at the Browns, Myles Garrett, the first 4 years of his career, he's played quite a bit of snaps. This past season, the second half, they tried to trim down his snap counts because he was coming off of COVID, and you could really tell it was bothering him. He looked like he was gasping for air sometimes on the sideline. And, when you look at this position, there's a lot of unknown behind Myles Garrett going into 2021. One big thing being, Olivier Vernon, who many thought might be back. That's not a guarantee now because he tore his Achilles tendon in the season finale against Pittsburgh. And then you have, a veteran guy like Adrian Clayborn, and we hope can turn into something into a Porter Gustin, but a lot of unknown going into 2021 at the edge position besides Myles Garrett.
Yeah, so firstly, I'll touch on the 66% and 40% because the first question people ask is, well, he's obviously awful at maths because that doesn't add up to 100. And the reason for that is you're going to see some snaps, especially them obvious pass rushing snaps, third and long, anything like that, where you'll put a Myles Garrett. If we remember, Myles Garrett's first ever sack as a Brown actually came from the interior against the Jets. I believe it was the Jets, but it was certainly on the interior. So there's going to be times when you'll push them inside. Some people will call it NASCAR packages, whatever it is. Basically, you can have 3-4 edge rushers because it's not going to be a run play. If it's 3rd and 10, if it's 3rd and 15, 3rd and 20, they're going to be passing it. And if they run it, quite frankly, we don't really care. We'll mop that up. But it's going to be there to sort of let's get after the quarterback, put everyone there. So Myles Garrett can perfectly play more than that 66% of snaps, but you want the sort of talent there that he only needs to play 66%. There's going to be some games where it'll be up near 75%. But you're looking at those 2 starters being out there, and it's unique pretty much on the defense. The defensive line, you're going to see more rotation, whereas your corners and safeties will probably just play 100% of snaps. So it's one where you'll see the guardrails, don't pay for depth. There's sort of an exception when you come to the defensive line because if Myles Garrett's only playing, say, twice as many snaps as edge 3 or edge 4, you actually need more depth there because, quite frankly, being top heavy, if Myles Garrett's not on the field for 3 and 10 snaps, he's not benefiting you there, whereas a corner that plays 100% of snaps is. So you have to take that into account, and you can't just go, hey, we've got two awesome starters. It's what I do on Madden, and it doesn't matter about the two backups, because this is the one position on defense, as well as the interior, where backups really matter. And it's really a unique position, the edge room, and as we'll sort of discuss it more, you've got the one starter locked in. And I think you've got a really, really nice fourth and fifth piece. It's almost the middle of the sandwich is what's missing. So now we've got to fill in that second and third spot. But no, we'll get to them. But yeah, first name, obviously one of your two starting edge defenders. And the reason why I'd encourage everyone to use edge defender as a classification, people will start talking about TJ Watt as a linebacker. It's absolute nonsense. The NFL is awful at this designation of linebackers, defensive ends. It's why I always encourage people just move to using edge. PFF sort of started the trend. Over the caps come on board with it. More and more places are moving towards it. It just makes everything so much more transparent when someone goes, that guy's an edge defender. But yeah, Myles Garrett is your first name. He's got his fifth-year option. He's got another 5 years here. Probably might not get a second contract, but hey, that's a problem for 6 years away, and it's a nice position to be at.
No doubt. When you got an all-pro locked in for the next 5 years, and you don't have to worry about it, I mean, that's a good place to be in if you're the Browns. And you look at the other side. I mentioned, Vernon. There was a chance maybe he could come back after this year. He was having a good year. We were finally getting to see the Olivier Vernon we saw down in Miami before he got the big deal with the Giants. Obviously came here in the Odell Beckham trade. Was having a great season. Obviously the Achilles injury just really puts a damper on him, because he would have got a nice deal, I think, in free agency, if not from us, from somebody else for sure. So now we're in a hole where we don't have another edge opposite Myles right now that can come in or that can start on the roster. So we're going to be obviously looking at free agency, the draft, maybe a trade. Jack, when you look at this, who out of all the people that are available right now that are free agents, who's the one guy that you'd bang the table for to Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski and Joe Woods and say, this is the guy you need to bring in that would be a perfect edge opposite Myles Garrett?
Yeah, so my guy is Romeo Okwara. And I'll sort of wind back a little bit here to sort of explain the theory. So I think if Vernon stayed healthy, he was a lock. I thought it was going to be like an $8 million 1 year deal, $15 million over two. And that's what you're looking at. You've got in your head basically a 2 year window on the edge line before Myles Garrett becomes ridiculously expensive. When Myles Garrett becomes ridiculously expensive, you have to have a draft pick opposite him. There's just not going to be the option to throw a second name in there. So if you're signing a free agent, they're on a 2 year deal. It might say 3 years on the piece of paper, but they'd look to trade it off after that sort of second year. They could probably be cheeky and try pull a third one, but then you're taking money out of either, say, going cheap on the interior, you're going cheaper in coverage. Myles Garrett is basically going to take up 75% of the money you're going to put into that edge room, and there's 5 players to fill, and he's just one of them. So you've got almost a little sort of 2 year window where you can go a little bit more expensive. We're not talking Shaquille Barrett, as I've said. I heard some fans talking, we just sign him, where you can pair him up with Myles Garrett. It's not going to happen. And if it does happen, then you're going to just be awful in the defense. You might just have no secondary. And 2 pass rushers and no secondary, you get destroyed. So yeah, it would have been a really nice option, Vernon. Trey Hendricks is another name I've heard thrown around. Great sack production. And coming into last season, he was a name I quite liked coming up to this year. Good athletic profile, good player. Unfortunately, got a load of sacks. And the issue is sacks are really hard to repeat, but teams ridiculously overpay for them. So if a player gets a load of sacks, just take it off the board, because then the cost doesn't match what the likely production is there. Pressures, really, really good measure there. If you were going to go big name, I think the biggest name out there that realistically could be a Brown is Melvin Ingram. And then I think you've got sort of a tier under that. These all come with issues. You've got Alden Smith, Everson Griffin, and then for me, Romeo Okwara. And the reason why I really like Romeo Okwara is you can do a 3 year deal. And the advantage of a 3 year deal is we can talk about pairing him with a draft pick, etc. But he's going to come in. He's going to be sort of that middle of the road edge 2. He's not going to be amazing. We're not going to be there talking about he's as good as Vernon, and that's perfectly fine. But he's going to be middle of the road. And if he's a middle of the road age 2 for a year, and then for the year 2 and 3, he then becomes one of the top 3 third edges in the NFL because we've got a draft pick that stepped up opposite Garrett, then you're in a really, really, really good position. So I'm looking bigger picture with this. It's not going to be a sexy name to bring in this year, but let's pair him with a draft pick, and I think Okwara is the perfect name to go to. There's a lot of upside there. He's had a better year than last year, but it's not Trey Hendrickson where there's a load of sacks and it's like, oh, this guy's going to get silly money.
Yeah, I mean, if they could find that, middle of the road edge rusher in free agency and then pair him up with somebody in the draft, I'm of the belief that they'll get someone, I think, either in round 1 or round 2 at the edge rusher spot. There is some options, being mocked to the Browns, outside of the ones that are still mocking linebacker to the Browns at 26. That's not going to happen. But I do think if they can find someone like an Okwara, however you pronounce his name.
Let's call him Romeo.
Or Romeo. Or, if somehow they can get a Melvin Ingram or an Everson Griffin in here and they draft someone, I think that would fill the void for missing out on Vernon. Vernon could come back. I think it's a long shot, and I think it would be a low salary deal just because who knows if he's going to be ready in time for even training camp or the beginning of the season. It could be a situation where they put him on the PUP list and he's not available till like week 6 of the season. But I think he could come back. They could sign him and say, hey, you can rehab and you can get, and midway through the season, you could come back and hop on the defensive line and try to help us make another playoff / Super Bowl run. I mean, I don't think that's out of the question, but I also think that Andrew Berry and company are going to be smart and say, we're not going to bank on Vernon. We're going to go try to find somebody else that can fill his spot and someone that can help Myles Garrett.
Yeah, so I think the smart move with Vernon, because if we're looking sort of 9 months, and it can take longer than 9 months, and even after those 9 months, he might not be back to peak production. It might take another month after that to sort of get there, and he becomes so. If I was going to sign Vernon, what I would do is offer him, hey, we're going to give you the vet minimum, 1 year deal, vet minimum, but we're going to tie incentives in there that you can get up to 10 million. So I would have loads, a really incentive heavy deal, because then if he signs and he goes on the PUP list, I think that can take him to the first 6 weeks of the season before he needs to be activated. Then they can make a decision of going, actually, let's keep him there and sort of give it a shot. And at the same time, if he can't make it, then he's still in the building, because I think he's got a lot that he can give, especially if we're drafting 1-2 guys. We've obviously got Porter Gustin in the room. We've got another player we'll touch on, but he can give a lot to the team. So I think it could be a smart move where they go, look, either you spend the time out and then second half of the season when you're ready to come back, let us know and we can do a deal if we've got a need, because you never know. There might be, they bring in Okwara, they've got Garrett, they had a draft pick, and they've got 2 guys they really like who are younger. They might go, look, there's not a spot there. Go for another team that is competing for a Super Bowl. But there is the option where they can go, hey, we'll give you a 1 year deal. It might only be 1.5 million, but the incentives are there. It can take you to 7.5. It can take you all the way up to 10, because some of them he's never going to get near. So different thresholds for sort of playing time. There's no chance that he's going to play over half the season if he's not back till like week 8. You're not going to get all those snaps. So I think they could come out with a really attractive incentive-laden deal. But that's the only way I see him coming back. And if he's doing that, you'd still fill the room with 5 players, and then there's a good chance one of them's going to end up on the IR at some point, or you potentially cut them or trade someone.
When you look at the rotational pieces, right now we have Adrian Clayborn, but you write in your article, Jack, that he has an option and he's not so much a guarantee to be on the roster at the moment. So please explain.
Yeah, so you got a 3 million option on Adrian Clayborn, and for me, he's not worth 3 million. I didn't mind the signing. I like the signing. There was upside to him, but he's not been great. And for me, it's the perfect one. You go, look, there's 3 million there. We can do better. And if we go in with this strategy of 2/3 is a draft pick and a veteran, Adrian Clayborn's not your veteran that you're going to pair a draft pick with, because even if you said, hey, whatever happens, I'm going to take the best edge available at 26, that edge isn't going to be coming in and look like Myles Garrett. It's not not a pick that's going in the top 5, top 10. There might not even be an edge rusher going in the top 10 this year. There seems to be quite a lot of good names, but no worldies, which actually helps the Browns because it pushes it further down, and we ain't picking top 20, so who cares what talent goes there? So Adrian Clayborn for me is not the guy. It's going to be a free agent and a draft pick, and even if they went first round draft pick, they still need a veteran, and for me, Adrian Clayborn's not the guy.
No, I would agree. I liked the signing last year at the time. I was pushing more for Jabal Sheard, but Clayborn was a solid option to bring in. He's 32. He'll be 33 by the time the season starts. He's obviously trending down. Isn't the same player from a couple years ago in Atlanta when he had 9.5 sacks, part of that defense that went to the Super Bowl. I think they can do better in terms of a veteran, free agent signing. You mentioned quite a few names as potential options here for a rotational spot. Ronald Blair, Jordan Jenkins, Tyus Bowser, Terrell Basham, who has connections to Ohio, went to Ohio University, and of course your boy Vinny Curry, who's still out there on the market. Played for the Eagles last year. I think the Browns were interested as well. He ultimately went back to Philly, but there's a lot of names out there that could be options for the Browns in a rotational role.
Yeah, so it's one of them that if they go, hey, we're committed to a first, second round pick. We like the idea of your Okwara, Melvin Ingram, but maybe they get better deals somewhere else. And that's always something you need to take into account. These teams are going to have like 10, 15 names for potentially each room. And they'll have a point where they go, right, we want Melvin Ingram. He's our number one target, but we're not going over this deal. And then they'll have the next name where this is what we're going to offer. This is the ceiling. And they're just effectively going to work through it. And all it takes is, say we're looking at all of these guys as rotational pieces. It just takes one team to go, he's actually going to be a starter for us. We're going to offer $8 million a year. And then suddenly that guy that you're looking at as going, we're going to pay $3 million a year. Suddenly you're just completely blown out of the water. So teams are going to have lots of piles of names. Obviously, Vinny Curry, we offered slightly more money than the Eagles, but he's an older player and he went, no, actually, I want to stay with the Eagles. And to be fair, if you're a player, do you want to travel, say it is $250,000? Do you want to uproot your family? You potentially got kids in schools for the sake of $250,000 when you've earned loads of money. You really like living in that part of the world. It's not a life-changing amount for a guy that's earned, say, 20 odd million in an NFL career. I don't know if Vinny Curry's earned quite that much, but it's one where, it's a nice position to be in life where you go at 250,000. I'm not that worried. But no, it's one that they're always out there looking for more talent, add more people to the room. And you just need lots of bodies. But for me, if we're looking at the sort of edge 3 at the start of the season, for me, it's first, second round draft pick. Might potentially go into the third round, just depending what they like there. But I would be shocked if day 2 of the draft ends and we haven't added an edge. Even if we go get a Melvin Ingram on day 1, I still think by the end of day 2, we will see an edge join the Cleveland Browns.
I would definitely agree with that. I do think they know they have to find someone opposite Myles, and the draft is the best spot because they keep him on a relatively fair contract that's not going to break the bank for him. When you talk about another rotation spot, you have Porter Gustin as a guy. I would say you thinking he's going to be a lock-in. You look at his stats and you thinking like we could find someone better, but. You said he stepped up in the second half, and you could see the flashes in Gustin's game when he does get more of an opportunity. But he is a solid rotational piece at best, and you can carve out an NFL career in that role. So what do you think of Gustin, and do you think he is a lock to be on the team next year?
I think Gustin's an absolute lock. I think he's a really, really good player. It's not sexy. I don't, because I never really look at who gets the sacks and other things. I just more or less phase off and ignore it all. But he's just a really, really good piece. Had a great second half of the season. Yeah, wasn't particularly great early on. But yeah, second half of the season, when he was used more in that sort of rotational role, he seemed to more flourish. At the start of the season, he was asked to play 11 snaps week 1, 63, 53, 41, and that wasn't really him. Whereas you get him into that sort of 20 to 30 snaps in a game, and his numbers went up a lot more. There was more pass rush. There was just more productivity from him. So that's the way you want to use him. And I think there is a lot of upside. He's only had 2 years in the league, so he comes back as an exclusive rights free agent. You're paying I don't know what the number's going to be. It's either going to be like 790,000 or 850,000. And quite frankly, you're not going to find anyone better than that on a deal. So no, he's certainly back next year. Potentially he could do his fourth year here as a restricted free agent. Is he someone you're going to pay money to long term? No. But he's got certainly 1 year, maybe 2. No, it's a player. Why not? Let's make the most of it. It's a good find, a good pickup by John Dorsey, who came in and he flashed late last season. Was it last season? He played was it second half of the season? It was late in the year he joined.
Yeah, 2019. It was after the Myles suspension.
Yeah. And no, he showed flashes and he continues to improve. So I think he's really good. But you want him as your 4. You don't want him as your 2 or 3. If he's getting into the role where he's starting, obviously, yeah, if you get a few injuries, stuff has to change. But he's not someone you want to go out there and go, yeah, this guy we want playing 50+% of snaps.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get him, like you said, into a spot where he's doing like 20 to 30 snaps a game, it can give you a little bit. I mean, that's great. Jack, you say you don't look at sacks. What do you exactly look for with an edge rusher? Is it the pressures? Is it the QB hits? Like, what exactly are you looking for when you're looking at edge rushers?
Yeah, so I'm looking partly through the help of like PFF grades, but it's essentially all around pass rushing stats, sort of the pressures, because pressures are pretty much stable from year to year, whereas sacks, you can have year to year where it goes up, it goes down, and you see some of these guys, they get paid on the back of, hey, all these snaps, this is a guy that we really want, and then next year it goes back down, and it's like, oh, why did this happen? I wasn't expecting that. And it's like, well, sacks are almost noise. It's a bit like turnovers from one year to the next. They go up, they go down, things like that. There's just so much variation. But no, if you start looking at like the advanced stats by PFF, there is some really, really tasty information. And no, it says he's good. Obviously, yeah, we're not in the same discussion of Vernon and Garrett. But yeah, I think he gives you everything that Clayborn can give you.
Without a doubt. When you're looking at, the depth of the edge defender spot, there's one name that seems to be, that some Browns fans seem to forget. It's a guy we picked up last year late. I think it was late in training camp or late in it was late in training camp because there wasn't a preseason. Curtis Weaver was, correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, a 5th round pick of the Dolphins?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. And he got hurt and the Dolphins waived him. And I think they were hoping that he would pass through waivers and then they would just stash him on the injured reserve for the 2020 season and hope he comes back. Well, Andrew Berry in the front office made a smart move. They picked him up. Weaver was one of the top 32 draft prospects last year by Pro Football Focus. And, I remember I think it was day 3 of the draft, hoping the Browns would draft him because, people are saying, like, this kid's good. Go watch him. You watched him at Boise State, and he was solid as an edge rusher. And it would have been perfect for the Browns to pick him up. And when they did pick him up, myself and other Browns fans were ecstatic when we got him. Unfortunately, he did miss all of last year because of injuries. He actually just started running last week. If anybody had seen the video on social media, he's running at the Berea facility. So, there's hope that next year he can come in and give the Browns something at that edge defender spot. Jack, you even mentioned that he could contribute, especially if he can contribute on special teams. It would be a gem of an acquisition by Andrew Berry in the front office. So talk about Weaver, and you don't have him as a lock, but I would certainly think he would be the front runner for edge defender 5 going into 2021.
Yeah, for me, I'm really, really positive. The only issue with him is just the NFL body. Can he add the muscle, sort of the physique there? Because the pass rushing skill is not in doubt. He knows what he needs to do to get to the quarterback. So can he just get everything else there? And that's why PFF just fell in love with the guy, because they saw that he can do what he needs to do. So when we picked him up, for me, I said, hey, we've just picked up a third-round pick for next season in free agency, and that's effectively what's happened. That we just saw, hey, who wants to pick up this free third-round pick that's just floating around? And Andrew Berry was like, yeah, I love that, and it was just a genius move. That, yeah, what did it cost the Browns? 2-3, I think it was $400,000. And that's nothing in the grand scheme of what goes on in the NFL and the amount of money you're paying. Just to say, let's see what the guy can do next year. Let's train him up, get that body ready. So is he a lock? I'm never going to say a player that's never played an NFL snap can be a lock to make the roster. But he goes into camp as a really solid name. And I think it leaves a really weird position for the Browns, because if you like Gustin and you like Weaver, it makes no sense to spend a day 3 pick on an edge this year, because obviously you're going to bring in UDFAs, you always do. You need more names to compete there. But if Gustin and potentially Weaver are locks at 4 and 5, and you've got a lock at 1, and then instead you go sign a Okwara, you've got a lock at 2. If you then use a first, second, third round pick, why would you draft someone in the 5th and 6th round? It just doesn't make sense unless you're going, we're not actually sure on Weaver, which certainly could be the case. But if they really like the upside of Weaver, there's no reason to replace Gustin. I would be shocked if it's almost like I feel really safe guaranteeing in the first 3 rounds we'll draft a edge, and I feel really safe guaranteeing in the 4th, 5th, and probably 6th we won't draft an edge. Obviously, once you get to 6th, 7th, it's basically UDFAs by that point, but it's one of them weird positions where really positive top of the draft, but quite frankly, once it gets to day 3, I ain't going to be looking at an edge list to see who's there.
Yeah, absolutely. It cost us $400,000 to pick up Weaver off of waivers last year, and he's due $660,000 this year. There's no guaranteed money left, so I mean, even if the Browns just they give him a chance and they don't see anything, they can cut him, and it won't cost them anything in terms of the cap. So that's always a good thing as well. You look at the other names that right now are on the Browns rosters, like going into 2021, Joe Jackson, who they picked up from the Cowboys after final cuts last year, Cameron Malveaux, who was on the practice squad, and he came up for, it was either the Texans or the Eagles game. I forget which one. It was those really terrible, rainy, windy games in Cleveland. But he made a play. I think he had a strip sack. So that's another intriguing option. George Obina, who was on your guys' podcast last summer, I remember that, and Trevon Young. So they have a lot of guys, and I'm sure they'll add at least 1, maybe 2 more this offseason. So the edge defender spot is definitely going to be an intriguing one to watch going into 2021.
Yeah, Malveaux, he'd done a lot more in the first 2 years. So he had 107 snaps with Miami in 2017. 2018, he had some snaps with Arizona and Miami, total 174. And then last year, it was a total of 18. He looked good on those 18, but it is 18 snaps. So it's one that, yeah, they'll certainly have in there for camp, and say someone could go down, Gustin, Weaver. There's no reason he couldn't step in and be that number 5 for you.
Yeah, I remember he made that big play, and I was texting my buddies, like, who is that guy? And they're like, oh, it's Malveaux. He got called up from the practice squad. And I was like, well, that shows how much I've been paying attention this week, because I didn't even know he was on the practice squad. But those 18 snaps were impressive. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the plan is for him, as well as the rest of the edge defender room going into this next coming season. Jack, as we wrap things up, go ahead and plug your article, plug your social media, and we'll get on out of here.
So this is number 7 in a series of 12. It's over on the dogland.com, or just quite simply type in dog.land. Check that out. They're all there. If you click on today's, you can see all the links from the previous ones. So we're just going through QB all the way through to special teams. But it's at Jack Duffin on Twitter, DUFFIN. So yeah, DMs are open, so you can send any cap questions. You can tweet them at me. Roster construction cap. Happy to help out with anything in that realm. But no, thank you very much for having me on the show. But looking forward to it. The fun this off-season is going to be chatting about the defense. Last year, it was all about what are they going to do, basically all around the offensive tackle room. This year, the defense is the fun, and the wide receiver room is just intriguing. But the real fun is, it's all going to be defense. So it should be a really great set of shows over the next 4.
Absolutely. We're going to keep rolling this week. Wednesday, we'll be covering the interior of the defensive line. Friday will be the linebackers, and then next week we'll wrap things up with the secondary and special teams. If you haven't, go back and listen to any episode we've done so far. We covered the offensive side of the ball the last 2 weeks, so definitely check it out on the Dogland podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. As for me, you can follow me on Twitter at JackMcCurry08. Check out thedogland.com. Like Jack said, we're covering all things Cleveland Browns over there. Jack's doing great work with the offseason roster deep dive. We're also breaking in some draft content this week. Alex Hale, who covers the draft for us, is by the time this podcast is out, the first mock draft should be up. And we'll have Alex on later this week as well to discuss his mock draft. So definitely check that out. And thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys on Wednesday as we break. Jack?
One little bit. I threw out an article right in the middle of the deep dives. There's Nick Chubb's contract, what he's probably going to get. So that's an important plug, just to discuss it. It's $65 million over 5 years. Don't worry too much about the headline figure. All running back deals, 2-year deals. So $26 million over 2, and then some option years. But no, go read that out on the dogland.com. It's all broken down there. Loads of really good stuff. And you guys voted. It's Wyatt Teller coming to you next.
Yes, and I will say, because Jack didn't believe it, the Nick Chubb article got more than the Baker Mayfield extension article. So Jack was a little bit ashamed by that, but that Cleveland loves their running backs. Jack, you need to start paying attention to it.
I'm never writing about Nick Chubb ever again. I'm done. I quit.
But as we get on out of here, we'll catch you all later this week as we talk about the interior defensive line. And as always, Browns fans, go Browns.
Go Browns.